78,000 American soldiers remain missing from World War II. Frank Nault was one of them. In 1964, 20 years after he vanished in Normandy, a French farmer's plow uncovered his dog tags. What official search teams couldn't find, one woman discovered by accident. This is the remarkable true story of how civilian curiosity solved a military mystery and brought closure to a family that waited 2 decades for answers. Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The pre-dawn darkness over Saint-Lô sector carries the weight of impending battle. Sergeant Miller's voice cuts through the morning stillness as he addresses his squad, their faces smudged with dirt and exhaustion. The 29th Infantry Division has been grinding through the bocage for weeks, each hedgerow a potential grave. "Listen up," Miller says, his breath visible in the cool air. "Intelligence reports Jerry positions 200 meters northeast. We need eyes on that. Crossroads before the main advance." Private First Class Frank D. Nault shifts his M1 Garand, metal cold against his palm. At 22, he has learned to read the landscape, every dip in the earth, every broken fence post. The Norman countryside has become a textbook written in blood and shell fragments. "I'll take point, Sergeant." Nault volunteers, his voice steady despite the artillery rumbling in the distance. His comrades nod with the quiet respect soldiers reserve for those who step forward when others hesitate. Miller studies the young soldier's face. "Stay low. Radio check every 15 minutes. If you're not back by 0700, we advance without you." Nault moves through the pre-dawn mist, his boots silent on the wet grass. The hedgerows tower above him, ancient barriers that have outlasted kings and now shelter killing fields. Behind him, the war continues, its mechanical breathing, the distant thrum of engines, the whispered prayers of men who know that breakfast might be their last. At 07:15, Miller checks his watch and reaches for the radio. Static fills the air, but no voice answers his call. The crossroads lies ahead, empty of intelligence and of the soldier who went to gather it. In the unit log, a clerk writes with careful precision, "Private Nault, Frank D., unaccounted for following reconnaissance mission. Status, unknown." The field command post occupies a bombed farmhouse, its remaining walls offering thin protection against the morning's intensifying artillery. Maps cover every available surface, marked with the previous night's advances and yesterday's casualties. Major Harrison reviews the morning reports, each page a catalogue of human arithmetic. 23rd Infantry reports 2 KIA, 7 wounded. Lieutenant Davis reads from the communications log. 1st Battalion unable to establish contact with reconnaissance elements. The radio crackles with fragmented transmissions units calling for medical evacuation, requests for ammunition, reports of enemy movement. Each voice carries the weight of immediate survival, the language pared down to essential truths. "Sir, we've lost communications with the forward observation post," Davis continues. "Phone lines cut by shelling. No visual contact since 0600. Harrison traces the battle lines on his map with a pencil worn to its metal. The bocage swallows men and messages with equal appetite. In this landscape, a soldier can vanish between one hedgerow and the next, becoming another name in the endless lists that flow back to division headquarters. Mark it as communication failure, Harrison instructs. Heavy enemy fire preventing immediate search and rescue operations. Continue advance as planned. The typewriter in the corner maintains its mechanical rhythm, documenting the morning's losses in careful bureaucratic language. Each missing soldier becomes a file, each file a question that may never find its answer. The war moves forward, leaving behind those it cannot count. Outside, the artillery crescendo builds toward the next phase of attack. Inside, clerks continue their patient work of recording what the fog of war obscures the difference between missing and killed, between unaccounted for and presumed dead. By evening, another page joins the growing stack of incomplete stories. The casualty collection point operates with the efficiency of necessity. Stretcher bearers move between the wounded and the dying, while medical clerks document each case with meticulous attention to detail. 3 days after the Crossroads reconnaissance, the administrative machinery of war processes its human cost. Captain Roberts reviews the missing personnel reports, each form representing a family somewhere in America, waiting for news that may never come. The mimeograph machine produces carbon copies that will travel from Normandy to Washington, carrying names that artillery fire has scattered to the wind. Nault, Frank, D. Roberts reads aloud to his assistant. No remains recovered. No witness statements. Last seen proceeding to observation post near grid, coordinates 4-7 alpha. The assistant types carefully, the keys striking paper with bureaucratic finality. Each letter commits another piece of uncertainty to official record. The forms require specific language, missing in action, rather than killed in action, a distinction that preserves hope while acknowledging ignorance. Prepare notification telegram, Roberts instructs. Next of kin, Mrs. Dorothy Nault, Manchester, Vermont. Standard format. The Western Union telegram takes shape under careful supervision. The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son, Private First Class, Frank D. Nault, has been reported missing in action in France since 30 June. If further details or other information are received, you will be promptly notified. Each word has been chosen by committees and approved by generals, language designed to balance honesty with compassion. Somewhere in Vermont, a mother will read these words and begin a vigil that may last decades. The clerk seals the telegram in its yellow envelope, adding it to the stack that will cross the Atlantic, carrying questions without answers. Saint-Lô stands in ruins, its medieval stones scattered by weeks of bombardment. German positions crumble under Allied pressure, but the retreat leaves behind a landscape poisoned by high explosives and marked by hastily dug graves. Civilians emerge from cellars to survey the wreckage of their ancient town. Marie Dubois ventures into her fields for the first time since the Americans arrived. The earth bears the scars of modern warshell, craters filled with stagnant water, twisted metal scattered among the grass, sections of hedgerow blasted into unrecognizable tangles of stone and root. Near the eastern boundary of her property, she pauses at a depression in the soil that was not there before the WWII battle. Artillery has reshaped the landscape, collapsing sections of ancient trenchwork and revealing layers of earth that have not seen sunlight since her grandfather's time. The Americans fought here, she tells her neighbor later, pointing toward the disturbed ground. I saw them retreating under mortar fire, carrying their wounded. Some fell and could not be carried. The neighbor nods with the understanding of those who have lived through occupation and liberation. The countryside holds its dead with equal indifference, French, German, American bones, settling into soil that has absorbed centuries of conflict. Recovery teams will come eventually, following maps and eyewitness reports, searching for the scattered remains of young men far from home. But the bocage guards its secrets carefully, and many searches will end in frustration and incomplete files. Marie covers the depression with a wooden cross fashioned from fence posts, a temporary marker for ground that has been consecrated by violence. The gesture acknowledges what she cannot name, that beneath her fields lie stories that the war's end cannot conclude. The Western Union office in Manchester, Vermont, maintains the sombre efficiency required for wartime communication. August heat settles over the small town as Mrs. Dorothy Nault receives the telegram that will reshape the remainder of her life. The yellow envelope arrives with the weight of official certainty and personal devastation. Mrs. Nault? The telegraph operator speaks with practiced gentleness, having delivered too many such messages to families whose sons serve overseas. There's word from the War Department. Dorothy Nault's hands tremble as she breaks the seal. 22 years of raising her son, of watching him grow from boy to man, collapse into the formal language of military bureaucracy. The words blur as she reads them once, twice, a third time, seeking clarity in their careful ambiguity. Missing in action, she whispers, to herself, the phrase offering neither hope nor closure. In the kitchen where Frank once ate breakfast before his morning chores, his mother sinks into a chair that suddenly seems too large for her diminished world. Neighbors arrive with the swift compassion of small communities. They speak in hushed tones about prayer and patience, about other boys who were missing and later found. But their words cannot penetrate the fog of uncertainty that now surrounds every aspect of Mrs. Nault's existence. That evening, she climbs the stairs to Frank's room and stands in the doorway, studying the bed he made before departing for basic training. His books remain on the nightstand, his clothes folded in drawers that she has not opened since his departure. The room becomes a shrine to possibility preserved against the day when uncertainty might resolve itself into homecoming. The War Department's telegram joins other official correspondence in the family Bible, filed between verses about faith and endurance. December snow covers the European theatre headquarters, muffling the sounds of clerical work that continues despite the approaching winter. Inside, casualty review boards process thousands of cases, attempting to impose administrative order on the chaos of continental warfare. Each file represents a family waiting for definitive word about sons who may never return home. Colonel Mitchell chairs the Missing Personnel Review Board, a bureaucratic entity tasked with determining the difference between missing and dead for soldiers whose fates remain unknown. The work requires careful attention to evidence, witness statements, and the geographical realities of modern combat. Case File 847 MIA. Mitchell reads to the assembled board. No, Frank D., Private First Class, 29th Infantry Division. Missing since 30 June during reconnaissance mission near Saint-Lô sector. No remains recovered. No confirmed witness statements. The file contains fragmentary evidence unit logs noting his departure, radio communications that ceased abruptly, maps marking his last known position. Each document represents an attempt to reconstruct events that occurred in the fog of battle, where certainty becomes the first casualty of artillery fire. Recommendation? Mitchell asks the board members, each representing different aspects of military administration, personnel, operations, intelligence. Insufficient evidence for presumptive death determination, responds the intelligence representative. Maintain missing in action status pending further investigation. The board's decision requires unanimous agreement, a bureaucratic safeguard against premature conclusion. In Frank Nault's case, the evidence permits only continued uncertainty, official acknowledgement that some questions cannot be answered with available information. Mitchell stamps the file with red ink, status unchanged, MIA, pending investigation upon cessation of hostilities. The file returns to its cabinet, joining thousands of similar cases that will outlive the war they document. May 1945 brings celebration to Paris and pragmatic assessment to the devastated countryside of Normandy. With German surrender, the systematic work of recovery begins searching for the thousands of Allied soldiers whose remains lie scattered across European battlefields. The U.S. Graves Registration Service establishes teams dedicated to this methodical examination of war's human cost. Saint-Lô emerges from rubble into tentative reconstruction. French civilians return to fields that have been battlegrounds, beginning the slow work of separating agricultural land from military cemetery. American recovery teams follow detailed maps, interviewing local witnesses and examining sites where combat was particularly intense. Technical Sergeant James Walsh leads a recovery team through the bocage, armed with metal detectors, excavation tools, and lists of missing personnel. Each location requires careful examination, soil analysis to determine disturbance patterns, artifact recovery to establish unit identification, photographic documentation for official records. 29th Infantry Sector shows 47 unrecovered personnel. Walsh briefs his team, focus on areas marked for heavy combat crossroads, observation posts, machine gun positions. The recovery work proceeds with archaeological precision. Each potential grave site must be excavated carefully, preserving whatever evidence might establish identity. Dog tags provide the most reliable identification, but artillery fire can scatter remains across wide areas, complicating recovery efforts. At the end of each day, Walsh submits detailed reports to division headquarters, grid coordinates searched, artifacts recovered, remains identified or unidentified. The work continues through spring and into summer, systematically addressing the landscape's hidden population of young Americans who will never return home. Frank Nault's name appears on every search list, but the bocage maintains its silence about his final moments. 3 years after the war's end, Mrs. Dorothy Nault maintains her vigil with the patience of those who understand that hope requires endurance. Frank's room remains unchanged, his books arranged on the nightstand, his clothes folded in drawers, his bed made with military precision learned in basic training. The steady arrival of official correspondence provides little comfort. Letters from the War Department acknowledge ongoing search efforts while offering no concrete progress. Each communication follows the same pattern bureaucratic language designed to balance honesty with encouragement, official acknowledgement that some questions resist easy answers. Among Frank's possessions, Dorothy discovers a letter dated July 15, 1944, 2 weeks after his disappearance. The envelope bears French postal marks, but no return address. Its contents, obviously censored by military authorities. With trembling fingers, she breaks the seal that has preserved her son's final written words. "Dear Mother." The letter begins in Frank's careful handwriting. "The hedgerows here smell of smoke and wet earth. Yesterday we advanced through countryside that looked like Vermont in spring, except for the shell holes and the sound of artillery in the distance. The French people wave when they see us coming, and children offer flowers despite having so little themselves." The letter continues with observations about weather, food, and the quiet heroism of ordinary soldiers far from home. Frank writes about his squad mates with affection, describing their shared hardships and small victories. His words reveal the thoughtful young man Dorothy raised, someone who found humanity amid the mechanical destruction of modern warfare. "I think of home often," the letter concludes, "especially your Sunday dinners and the sound of church bells in the evening. When this is over, I want to tell you about the courage I've witnessed here." The letter joins the growing collection of official documents in the family Bible. The reconstruction of Saint-Lô proceeds with the methodical efficiency characteristic of French municipal administration. By 1950, the medieval town has begun to emerge from its wartime rubble, medieval stones carefully sorted from modern debris. New buildings rise according to plans that acknowledge both historical precedent and contemporary necessity. Local farmers return to fields that served as battlegrounds, discovering that agriculture and warfare leave different kinds of scars on the landscape. Unexploded ordnance surfaces regularly during spring ploughing, requiring careful disposal by military teams that will continue this work for decades after the war's official conclusion. Marie Dubois supervises the clearing of her property, noting how artillery fire has altered drainage patterns and soil composition. Areas that once supported dairy cows now yield fragments of military equipment, helmet pieces, rifle parts, personal items that belong to young men who will never reclaim them. The local commune maintains careful records of these discoveries, documenting the war's physical legacy for future reference. Each piece of military debris represents a story interrupted by violence, evidence of human presence in landscapes that appear peaceful to casual observation. American equipment, probably 29th Division, notes the police inspector, who catalogues Marie's latest discovery, a corroded mess kit and scattered ammunition. We'll add it to the collection for repatriation services. These bureaucratic procedures acknowledge that warfare's consequences extend far beyond its official termination. The countryside continues to yield its secrets slowly, reminding residents that the past maintains an active presence in their daily lives. Children playing in reconstructed fields sometimes uncover buttons, belt buckles, and other personal items that once belonged to soldiers whose families still await word from across the Atlantic. The U.S. Army Mortuary Affairs Office in Arlington, Virginia, maintains detailed files on more than 78,000 servicemen whose remains have not been recovered from European battlefields. Annual reviews attempt to balance bureaucratic closure with family expectations, determining which cases merit continued investigation and which must be classified as presumed dead. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Henderson chairs the 1952 Review Board, examining cases that have remained open since the war's conclusion. Each file represents years of correspondence with families, coordination with European recovery teams, and the growing recognition that some questions may never receive satisfactory answers. Case Nay 1944, 29th Nault, Frank D. Henderson reads to the assembled board. 7 years missing. Extensive search. Efforts. No remains recovered. Family requests continued classification as MIA. The evidence file contains maps, witness statements, and recovery team reports from the Saint-Lô sector. Each document reflects careful investigation without yielding conclusive results. The Bocage's terrain has frustrated systematic search efforts, its maze-like geography hiding secrets that resist conventional archaeological methods. Recommendation for reclassification suggests the board's administrative representative. Sufficient time elapsed to justify presumptive death determination. Family benefits would be enhanced. Henderson studies Mrs. Nault's most recent correspondence, a carefully worded letter requesting that Frank's status remain unchanged pending further evidence. The administrative convenience of closure conflicts with parental hope that some evidence might yet surface to explain her son's fate. Maintain current classification, Henderson decides. Annual review to continue. Family. Notification of decision. The file receives a new stamp. Status unchanged. MIA. Next review scheduled 1953. Frank Nault's case remains officially unresolved, preserving the possibility that European soil might yet reveal its secrets. Mrs. Dorothy Nault's letter to the War Department reflects the careful penmanship of a woman educated in an era when correspondence required formal precision. Written on her best stationery, the letter requests reconsideration of her son's case, based on new information she believes might assist ongoing search efforts. I have recently discovered among Frank's belongings a detailed letter describing his unit's position near St. Lo, she writes. He mentions specific landmarks that might help focus recovery efforts in areas that have not yet been thoroughly examined. The letter demonstrates the persistence of maternal hope in the face of bureaucratic finality. 8 years after Frank's disappearance, Dorothy continues to believe that additional investigation might yield evidence of his fate. Her correspondence reflects both emotional need and practical cooperation with official procedures. The response arrives 6 weeks later, typed on War Department letterhead with the official courtesy reserved for family communications. Your information has been forwarded to European Recovery Services for evaluation, the letter states. Please be assured that all available resources continue to be dedicated to locating missing personnel. Dorothy preserves the correspondence in her family Bible, between pages that speak of faith and endurance. The exchange becomes part of a larger conversation between institutional responsibility and personal grief, official procedure, and individual need for closure. Each letter she writes demonstrates the extraordinary persistence of ordinary people confronting bureaucratic systems designed for efficiency rather than compassion. Her words bridge the distance between Vermont countryside and Norman battlefields, maintaining connections that military necessity could not preserve. In the margin of her copy, Dorothy writes, Frank would be 29 today. I pray someone finds him before I am too old to welcome him home. The St. Lo Municipal Archives occupy a restored building near the town centre, its reading room filled with documents that chronicle the region's recovery from wartime devastation. Local historian Philippe Moreau has spent 3 years examining records related to the 1944 liberation, attempting to construct a comprehensive account of events that many residents prefer to forget. His research focuses on correlating German defensive positions with American advance routes, using captured Wehrmacht documents to understand the tactical situation that confronted Allied forces during the breakthrough operation. The work requires careful attention to detail, cross-referencing multiple sources to establish accurate chronologies. Interesting anomaly, Moreau notes while examining 29th Infantry Division maps. Their advance charts show a sector that received heavy defensive fire but was never systematically searched by recovery teams. The anomaly reflects wartime exigencies. Unexploded ordnance in the area prevented immediate access, and subsequent administrative changes resulted in the sector being overlooked during systematic recovery operations. Military maps from 1944 show American positions that were later abandoned due to German counterattacks. Moreau traces the sector's boundaries on a contemporary map, noting its proximity to Marie Dubois' farm. The area encompasses several hedgerow complexes where German machine gun positions commanded excellent fields of fire, making advancement extremely costly for attacking infantry. This sector matches the description in several missing personnel reports, he observes, comparing his findings to official casualty lists. Frank Nault's last known position falls within these coordinates. The historian prepares a detailed report for submittal to American military authorities, suggesting that technological improvements in mine detection might now permit safe examination of previously inaccessible terrain. His findings join the growing archive of information that documents the war's persistent presence in Norman soil. The spring morning of 1964 arrives with exceptional clarity, the kind of weather that encourages agricultural optimism after a harsh Norman winter. Marie Dubois guides her plow through fields that have required 20 years to fully recover from wartime damage, soil composition finally restored to its pre-war fertility. Her plow blade strikes metal near the eastern boundary of her property, producing the distinctive sound that local farmers have learned to associate with buried ordnance. Marie stops immediately, examining the disturbance with caution, born of experience. 2 decades of farming have taught her to distinguish between artillery fragments and more significant discoveries. The object protruding from the earth appears to be a helmet, its distinctive shape recognizable despite severe corrosion. Marie carefully clears soil from around the artifact, revealing additional items beneath corroded metal that might once have been a rifle, fragments of leather equipment, and something that catches the morning light with metallic persistence. Dog tags. The metal discs emerge from the earth with their stamped information still partially legible, despite years of burial. Marie handles them carefully, aware that she holds someone's identity in her palm. The primary tag bears a name and service number: Nault, Frank D. 39847521, B-Neg, C. She stops her work immediately and covers the site with canvas, recognizing that this discovery requires official attention. The careful preservation of the scene reflects her understanding that these remains represent someone's son, husband, or father, a person whose family has wondered about his fate for 20 years. Walking to her farmhouse, Marie considers the strange circularity of discovery. The same earth that once absorbed the chaos of battle has now returned its secrets, offering answers to questions that have endured long beyond the war's official conclusion. The Saint-Lô Gendarmerie responds to Marie's call with the practiced efficiency of rural police accustomed to agricultural discoveries of wartime artifacts. Inspector Claude Renault arrives with documentation equipment and a photographer, prepared to record the scene according to protocols established for such findings. How deep was the burial? Renault asks, examining the site while his assistant photographs the undisturbed areas surrounding the discovery. The soil analysis will help determine whether the burial resulted from combat conditions or deliberate interment. Perhaps 1 meter, Marie responds. The plow blade struck metal, but the ground had already been disturbed. Artillery damaged this area severely during the liberation battles. Renault's examination reveals evidence of wartime collapsed soil layers that suggest a trench or foxhole had caved in, possibly due to nearby shell impacts. The uniform distribution of artifacts indicates rapid burial under combat conditions, rather than systematic interment. The depth and position suggest the soldier was trapped when the earthworks collapsed, Renault observes. Heavy shelling could have caused such burial without deliberate enemy action. The dog tags provide immediate identification, their stamped information clearly linking the remains to an American serviceman reported missing in 1944. Renault photographs each tag from multiple angles, ensuring that the documentation will meet requirements for official identification procedures. We must notify American military authorities immediately, he instructs his assistant. This discovery requires coordination with their Graves Registration Command. The site receives official protection, pending investigation by qualified American personnel. Yellow tape cordons off the area, and Marie agrees to postpone agricultural work until the examination concludes. That evening, Inspector Renault completes his initial report. Discovered remains appear consistent with missing American soldier. Site secured pending official investigation. The American Embassy in Paris dispatches a graves registration investigator within 48 hours of receiving Inspector Renault's report. Major Thomas Bradley arrives in Saint-Lô with specialized equipment for archaeological examination of military burial sites, accompanied by a photographer and administrative assistant. Bradley's preliminary examination confirms the authenticity of the discovery. The dog tags match service records for Private First Class Frank D. Nault, reported missing from the 29th Infantry Division in June 1944. Soil analysis supports Inspector Renault's assessment that the burial resulted from combat conditions rather than deliberate interment. Site coordinates match the unit's last known position, Bradley notes, while comparing the discovery location to archived military maps. The 29th Infantry was operating in this sector when Nault disappeared. Systematic excavation reveals additional evidence, fragments of an M1 rifle, personal equipment consistent with 1944 military issue, and uniform remnants that confirm American identity. Each artifact receives careful documentation, photographed in situ before removal for detailed analysis. No evidence of enemy action, Bradley observes. Appears the soldier was caught in earthwork collapse during heavy artillery bombardment. Death would have been instantaneous. The investigation's conclusion satisfies requirements for positive identification under military procedures. Bradley prepares official documentation that will initiate repatriation proceedings, returning Frank Nault's remains to his family after 20 years of uncertainty. Mrs. Dubois deserves recognition for her careful handling of this discovery, Bradley tells local officials. Her respect for the remains and prompt notification made positive identification possible. The site examination concludes with final photographs and soil sampling. Frank Nault's long silence has finally ended, his story emerging from Norman earth to rejoin the historical record. The local newspaper, Ouest France, covers the discovery with the respectful attention that French media reserves for matters involving Allied war dead. The headline reads, "American soldier found after 20 years. Local farmer discovers missing GI in Norman field." The article describes Marie Dubois' discovery and the subsequent investigation, emphasizing the cooperation between French authorities and American military representatives. Local residents recall the 1944 liberation battles, providing historical context for readers too young to remember the war years. "We always knew that soldiers fell in these fields," Marie tells the reporter. "During the fighting, we saw American boys advancing under heavy fire. Some fell and could not be carried away by their comrades." Father Mathieu announces a special prayer service at Saint-Lô's rebuilt cathedral, inviting parishioners to remember not only Frank Nault, but all soldiers who gave their lives for French liberation. The service reflects the town's continuing gratitude for American sacrifice, maintained across 20 years of peace. News of the discovery reaches beyond local readership when wire services pick up the story. American newspapers publish brief accounts describing the farmer who found a missing GI, emphasizing the human interest angle of discovery and repatriation. The story resonates with readers who remember wartime casualty lists and families who waited for word about missing relatives. Frank Nault's case represents thousands of similar stories, but his emergence from Norman soil offers rare closure for questions that usually remain unanswered. In Manchester, Vermont, Missus, Dorothy Nault receives a telephone call from a reporter seeking comment about her son's discovery. Her response reflects 20 years of patient waiting. "I always knew that someone would find him. Frank was a good boy who deserved to come home." The Paris headquarters of the U.S. Graves Registration Command processes Frank Nault's case with the bureaucratic precision required for international repatriation of military remains. Colonel Robert Hayes reviews the identification evidence, ensuring that documentation meets stringent requirements for positive identification and family notification. Dog tag serial number matches service records exactly, Hayes notes while examining Major Bradley's report. Personal effects and uniform remnants confirm 29th Infantry Division identification. The official identification process requires cross-reference with archived military documents stored in multiple locations. Frank's service record emerges from filing systems that have preserved individual information about millions of servicemen, each file representing a personal story within the larger context of global conflict. Original missing personnel report filed July 1944. Hayes's assistant reads from the recovered documents. Family notification sent to Manchester, Vermont. Missus Dorothy Nault listed as primary next of kin. A previously missing field report surfaces during the file review, discovered in records that were misfiled during wartime administrative confusion. The document confirms Frank's position near the discovery site on the day of his disappearance, providing final corroboration for the identification. Field Report 29IR071. Private Nault proceeded to observation post grid 47 Alpha at 06:15 hours. Heavy enemy artillery commenced. 06:30. No subsequent contact established. The report resolves 20 years of uncertainty about Frank's final mission. His last known position corresponds exactly to Marie Dubois's discovery site, confirming that he died while performing his assigned reconnaissance duty. Colonel Hayes authorizes official notification to the Nault family, initiating procedures for repatriation and military burial. The paperwork that will restore Frank's name to family records begins its journey across the Atlantic. The telephone call reaches Mrs. Dorothy Nault on a quiet Tuesday morning in Manchester, Vermont. 21 years after receiving the original missing in action telegram, she answers another call from military authorities, this time bearing news that will conclude her decades of uncertainty. Mrs. Nault, this is Major Williams from the Army Casualty Notification Office, the voice explains with practiced compassion. I'm calling to inform you that we believe we have recovered your son's remains in France. Dorothy's knees weaken as she absorbs words she has imagined countless times, but never truly expected to hear. The kitchen chair that has supported her through years of waiting now holds her as official certainty replaces persistent hope. The identification was made through dog tags and personal effects discovered by a French farmer, Major Williams continues. Military investigators have confirmed that the remains are those of Private First Class Frank D. Nault. The conversation continues with details about repatriation procedures, burial options, and the timeline for returning Frank's remains to American soil. Each piece of information represents bureaucratic closure for a case that has remained open in Dorothy's heart for more than 2 decades. The French woman who found him treated everything with great respect, Williams explains. She immediately contacted authorities and ensured the site was properly preserved. That evening, Dorothy sits in Frank's unchanged bedroom, holding the official letter that will arrive in tomorrow's mail. For the first time in 21 years, she knows exactly where her son rests. The uncertainty that has shaped her daily existence slowly transforms into the different but manageable grief of definitive loss. The local newspaper publishes a brief announcement: missing local soldier found in France after 21 years. The U.S. Repatriation Unit at Le Havre processes military remains with the dignity befitting those who died in service to their country. Frank Nault's casket receives the same careful attention accorded to all American war dead returning home from European soil, draped in the flag that flew over the battlefields where he fell. Chaplain David Morrison conducts the ceremony that accompanies each repatriation, offering prayers for the deceased and comfort for families who have waited years for this moment. The service acknowledges both individual sacrifice and collective remembrance, honoring one soldier while recognizing the thousands who remain missing. Private First Class Nault served with distinction in the liberation of France, Morrison states during the brief ceremony. He gave his life, advancing American values of freedom and democracy, dying far from home but not forgotten by those he served. The military escort that will accompany Frank's remains to Vermont receives detailed instructions about family preferences and local arrangements. Each aspect of the homecoming reflects careful coordination between military efficiency and personal grief, official procedure, and private mourning. 21 years is a long time to wait, observes Sergeant Martinez, who supervises the repatriation detail. But some families never get this closure. Mrs. Nault is fortunate. The ship's manifest lists Frank among dozens of other servicemen returning to American soil, each representing a family's conclusion to uncertainty that began with wartime telegrams. The Atlantic crossing that once carried young soldiers to war now returns them home for final rest. Marie Dubois attends the Le Havre ceremony at the invitation of American officials, representing the civilian population that benefited from Allied sacrifice. Her presence acknowledges the connection between liberation and loss, gratitude and grief. The military escort arrives in Manchester, Vermont, on a crisp autumn morning that reminds Dorothy Nault of October days when Frank was a boy playing in leaves that covered the yard behind their house. The hearse moves slowly through familiar streets, past buildings that have witnessed her 21 years of waiting. Local residents line the route to the funeral home, many holding small American flags in quiet recognition of the soldier who has finally returned from war. Children too young to understand the historical significance wave at the passing procession, participating in a ritual of homecoming that transcends their comprehension. Mrs. Nault, the escort officer, says with formal respect, "On behalf of the United States Army, I present to you the remains of your son, Private First Class Frank D. Nault, who gave his life in service to his country. Dorothy approaches the flag-draped casket with steps that feel both foreign and familiar, each pace bringing her closer to the son she has imagined returning for more than 2 decades. Her fingers touch the fabric that covers the wooden box containing what artillery fire and time have left of Frank. The funeral director explains arrangements for the service, but Dorothy barely hears the practical details. After 21 years of preserving Frank's bedroom exactly as he left it, she must now plan his burial in Manchester Cemetery, choosing a plot near the headstones of relatives who died while waiting for his return. "He's home," she whispers to her sister, the first words she has spoken since the escort's arrival. The simple statement acknowledges both completion and transformation. Frank's physical return and her emotional journey from hope through uncertainty to acceptance. Outside, flags throughout Manchester fly at half-staff in recognition of the soldiers' homecoming. The funeral service at Manchester Congregational Church draws a congregation that includes aging veterans of World War II, local officials, and residents who remember Frank as a boy growing up in their community. The sanctuary fills with quiet dignity, appropriate for honouring a life interrupted by war and now commemorated through time's lens. Chaplain Morrison, who accompanied Frank's remains from France, delivers the eulogy that weaves together military service and personal memory. He reads excerpts from Frank's final letter, the words written in Norman hedgerows now spoken in Vermont countryside, where the soldier spent his youth. Frank wrote to his mother about the courage he witnessed in France. Morrison states, "Today we witness the courage of a mother who never stopped, believing her son would return home." The service includes military honours, a flag detail, the playing of taps, and the ceremonial folding of the flag that covered Frank's casket. Each element follows traditions established for honouring those who died in service, rituals that connect individual sacrifice to national memory. Veterans from Frank's generation serve as pallbearers, men now in their 40s who understand the arbitrary nature of survival and death in combat. Their faces reflect both grief for a fallen comrade and gratitude for their own preservation through the war's chaos. Dorothy receives the folded flag with hands that have waited 21 years for this moment. The triangle of fabric represents not only Frank's service but her own endurance through decades of uncertainty, patience that has finally yielded closure. The burial in Manchester Cemetery concludes with the traditional rifle salute, 3 volleys that echo across hills where Frank once played as a child. The sound travels beyond the cemetery to reach ears throughout the small town that has shared Dorothy's vigil. The Associated Press wire service carries Frank Nault's story to newspapers across America, where editors recognize the human interest value of a soldier's return after 21 years missing. The article emphasizes themes that resonate with readers who remember wartime casualty lists and families who waited for word about missing relatives. Vermont mother's long wait ends. Missing World War II soldier returns home after 2 decades, reads the headline in the Burlington Free Press. Similar stories appear in dozens of newspapers, each emphasizing different aspects of the discovery and repatriation. The coverage generates renewed public interest in ongoing efforts to locate missing servicemen from World War II and subsequent conflicts. Veterans organizations use Frank's case to highlight the continuing work of recovery teams operating in former battlefields around the world. This discovery demonstrates that our commitment to bring home missing servicemen extends beyond the end of hostilities, states a Veterans Administration spokesman. Every American who serves deserves the dignity of proper burial and family closure. Congressional representatives from Vermont cite Frank's case during hearings about military casualty recovery programs, arguing for continued funding of overseas search operations. The individual story becomes part of larger policy discussions about America's obligations to military families. Marie Dubois receives letters from American families thanking her for the careful attention she paid to Frank's discovery. Her actions exemplify the civilian cooperation that makes military recovery possible, demonstrating how ordinary people contribute to extraordinary outcomes. Military historians note that Frank's case establishes precedents for future discoveries, showing how agricultural activity, archival research, and international cooperation can resolve questions that conventional search methods could not answer. The story concludes with quiet recognition rather than dramatic celebration, acknowledging that truth emerges slowly from time's patient work. The Saint-Lô Memorial Garden dedicates a new plaque in 1967, honoring Allied soldiers who died during the town's liberation. Frank Nault's name appears among those whose sacrifice enabled French freedom, his story now part of the official historical record rather than an unsolved mystery. Marie Dubois attends the dedication ceremony with quiet pride, recognized by both French and American officials for her role in returning a missing soldier to his family. The honor acknowledges civilian contributions to military remembrance, demonstrating how ordinary people preserve extraordinary memories. Through her careful attention to what she discovered in her field, the mayor states during the ceremony, Madame Dubois enabled a family to conclude their long wait and a soldier to receive proper burial. The plaque lists names in alphabetical order, without distinction between rank or unit, acknowledging that death made equals of all who fell in the Bocage country. Frank's name joins those of comrades whose remains were recovered immediately after the battle, his delayed inclusion completing the memorial's accuracy. Veterans from the 29th Infantry Division attend the ceremony, grey-haired men who served alongside Frank during the Norman campaign. Their presence connects past sacrifice to present remembrance, honouring those who died while celebrating those who survived. Frank would appreciate being remembered here, one veteran observes. He always said the French people deserved their freedom. The ceremony concludes with the placement of American and French wreaths at the memorial base. Children from local schools participate by reading the names inscribed on the plaque, ensuring that another generation will remember the cost of their liberty. Marie tends flowers at the edge of her field where Frank was discovered, maintaining a small garden that acknowledges the sacred nature of ground where young men died for principles larger than themselves. Frank Nault's case files occupy an honoured place in the Army's missing personnel archives, serving as a model for future recovery operations that combine traditional investigation with civilian cooperation. Military historians study the procedural elements that enabled successful identification after 21 years, seeking lessons applicable to ongoing search efforts. The documentation preserves every aspect of Frank's story, from his original disappearance in Norman hedgerows to his discovery by a French farmer, from bureaucratic procedures that maintained hope to family endurance that sustained faith. Each element contributes to understanding how time reveals what war conceals. Academic researchers cite Frank's case in studies of post-war recovery operations, noting how agricultural activity, archival investigation, and international cooperation combined to resolve a mystery that conventional methods could not solve. The case demonstrates patience as an investigative tool. Some wars end only when the missing are found, writes a military historian examining recovery operations in former combat zones. Frank Nault's homecoming reminds us that closure operates on human timescales, not military ones. Mrs. Dorothy Nault lives quietly in Manchester until her death in 1973, secure in the knowledge that Frank rests in Vermont soil rather than Norman fields. Her perseverance through 21 years of uncertainty exemplifies the extraordinary endurance of ordinary people confronting historical forces beyond their control. The camera lingers on the French countryside where Frank fell, fields now restored to agricultural productivity, but forever marked by the knowledge of what lies beneath their surface. Hedgerows that once sheltered, advancing Americans now provide windbreaks for crops that grow in soil, enriched by the sacrifice of young men far from home. Nature reclaims battlefields with patient efficiency, but memory preserves what time attempts to erase. In quiet ceremonies and careful records, in family stories and national archives, the dead continue speaking to those willing to listen. Some silences require decades to break, but truth possesses its own persistence, emerging when conditions permit its recognition.